very much. Cheers, Holly. So hopefully you can see the presentation.
Yep, you can see.
On code katas. So this is a talk to do with my approach to code katas and refactoring code. It's not going to be a step-by-step guide following every single step that I do to refactor a code kata. It will be highlighting the sort of areas of interest of how I approach it, rather than every single button click and every single refactor, because that does get a little bit monotonous when you do it for 15, 20 minutes at a time, just changing particular functions that are very similar. Let's go to the next slide. Window. So I also want to talk about the benefits of code katas. So they offer a benefit of being able to practice refactoring. You can practice using your IDE and the features that your IDE can offer. And you can use the tooling around these katas as well. So you can not only just practice refactoring and keeping code tested, but you can look at refactoring tools like Easy Coding Standard and PHPStorm, as well as PHP Unit for the unit testing. So this particular kata I've recorded in different stages. When I feel that it's getting a little bit repetitive, I'll fast forward a stage. So bear with me when I do that, because I have to select each video individually. So let me just stop sharing and select the first video. This is a bit of a different process. So there's the first video. Hopefully you can see that video.
Yeah, we can see that. Be some hold music or something while we're switching them over.
To my introduction to the Yahtzee refactoring kata. My name is Michael Pritchard. I also go by the pen name of Penavan, which is a local mountain a few miles away from here. It's the highest mountain in South Wales. I've been interested in computers from a very young age, from when I was 11. But it was only recently, 7 years ago, that I got interested in web design, with volunteering as a admin on a Real Racing 3 wiki, where I got involved with the HTML and the wiki markup. And a few years later, then I was involved in installing some software in work, which involved PHP. So I got involved not only with the wiki markup, but also full stack development. And I really enjoyed it. And that paid off a year ago. My change of careers completely to a software developer, and I now work at Health Education Improvement Wales. So today I'm going to talk about the Yahtzee refactoring kata. This is available on GitHub. It's a kata which has been published by Emily Blanche, and it's a refactoring kata to do with code quality. As you can see, there is quite a few languages that are available to do in this particular kata. I'm going to concentrate on the PHP version. Those not familiar with Yahtzee, it's a dice game. It's a game which involves rolling 5 dice, 6-sided dice, and scoring the best score. And you got a choice. You can throw as many dice as you want to get the best score that you can, and you've got 3 attempts. So this is a Scandinavian version of Yahtzee. There's also a American version with slightly different spelling, which is slightly different rules, but this is the Scandinavian version. So we're interested in the score that is given to a category. We do not have to worry about how that score is created. We don't have to worry about how the game is going to be played. So when we get into the kata, you'll see that we only have to worry about one particular class and not have to worry about any thoughts about how that class is going to be used in the game itself. And we don't have to worry about creating the whole game from scratch. Go through some of the basic rules of Yahtzee. Yahtzee is a game of chance. So you throw a dice, and depending on how high your score is, you will create a score. So the highest score you can have is Yahtzee. So if you score 5 dice of the same face value, you score Yahtzee, which is 50 points. You can also score 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s. So literally, if you throw, as the examples show there, 2 4s, you will score 8. You can score a pair. So again, 2 4s will score 8, 2 6s will score 12. You can have 2 pairs. So if you've got a pair of 1s and a pair of 3s, you score both of those. You can have 3 of a kind. So again, a score of 3 dice of the same face value. If you don't have those scores, you can take that score and mark it on your scorecard as 0, as you can with the other categories as well. 4 of a kind, so if you haven't quite got Yahtzee, you've got 4 of a kind, you're nearly there, you can score 4. You can have a small straight, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can have a large straight, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you can have a full house, so you can have 2 of one kind, 3 of another. So this kata is also available on the cyberdojo.org. To install this particular kata, we need to pull the code from GitHub. So you can quite easily just go into GitHub. We need to sign in. So I've gone into incognito mode. Try and clear some of the clutter. When you click on the code icon, you've got a choice. You can install it using HTTPS, SSH, GitHub CLI. You can use GitHub Desktop or download with a zip. I'm going to use the SSH because I've already got a key set up where I can use SSH. If you haven't set that up, you can use HTTPS. In my development environment, I've got Laragon. So I don't need to use Apache. This is purely going to be a CLI command line. So I can open up the terminal, change the directories. I've created a directory called CLI. And I can clone this particular kata. This generally only takes less than a minute. It's quite a small kata. It'll just pull it down from GitHub. And once it's pulled it down from GitHub, we can just change the directories to Yahtzee. And make sure that we go into the PHP folder, because there are quite a few different programming languages. And Composer install. Again, this is quite a small kata. There's only a couple of dependencies. There are a couple of helper functions included in this kata. So you've got easy coding standard, which helps with coding standards, PHPStorm, which is a static analyzer, and we're going to need to have a PHP unit for all our unit tests. As you can see, the tests are all set up and running, so there's nothing further that we need to do to configure the environment to run tests. Once that's all set up, as we've done, we can open up PHPStorm, open up that particular project. As you can see, I've already run it once, so it's defaulting to that particular directory. If it wouldn't default into that directory, you just navigate to it. But again, make sure that you pick the PHP folder rather than all of these other languages that are available. And PHPStorm will open up the project and make sure the dependencies and everything are all installed. So this task, as I said, is to score a given roll of a given category of dice, and we don't have to worry about the rest of it. I'll just go through the program, the folder structure. So there's an SRC folder which has the Yahtzee class. There's a tests folder which has the tests. The vendor folder has all the dependencies. There's a couple of helper functions which will help us to run particular batch files. I'll go through them later on. There's the PHP unit setup, there's a PHP Sans setup, and there's an easy coding standard setup file. And we'll use them later on.
That was the first video. Let me just stop sharing and share the next one. You should see that now.
The next thing that I need to do is set up for PHP unit to run the tests. I haven't set up my default interpreter yet. So set that up as PHP 8. Apply that. Usually you have to do this once. And then set PHP 8 as the default interpreter. That should be it, because it's already picked up the PHP unit distribution file. That's it. The 13 tests have been passed. As you can see, I've got a helper function there that warns me when I don't use the keyboard shortcuts. So I should be using Shift and F10 to run that. So if I run Shift and F10, you can see it's a very quick way of rerunning that test. And I can expand the test and see what's actually been run and reduce it back down again. I set it to quite a high resolution so I can record this particular screencast. So all I'm interested in is seeing that the 13 tests have passed. So if I deliberately set up so that it will fail, you can see that one of the tests have failed. Revert that back, rerun the test, and all 13 are passing again. Now that we've got tests passing in PHP unit, I want to see the code coverage. And that's telling me that the SRC directory has got 100% coverage, 100% of files, but only 94% of coverage, 94 lines of code of coverage. So if we go into that PHP file, you can see the green lines here marking the ones that are tested or covered. This particular line isn't covered. You can see that this particular function for sixes isn't covered at all. There's no coverage at all for that particular test. So if I click on that and Control B, I can see where it's used, and it should be used in this particular test. It should test sixes. Looking at this particular test, there's nothing obvious to why it's not working. Except if you look at the tests, they should start test and then it should say the name of the test. Whereas this one starts with the name of the test and it ends with test. So the actual test description is incorrect. Method name. So if I rerun that code coverage, we're up to 97% of lines now. Go back to the Yahtzee class and sixes are now covered. That return isn't covered. That return isn't covered. So there are some edge cases that are not covered, but all the classes are, which is the important starting point. Edge cases I'll cover later. This is a particular edge case that for some reason isn't covered. Okay, so I'm happy with that. That's a good starting point. Now that we've got all 13 or 14 tests are now passing, previously it was 13, so this is now up to 14 tests. I can now look at this particular code and start looking at where I want to refactor it. One of the things that I like to do is look at the error edge cases, some of the errors first. So let's make a little bit more room. And let's have a look at some of the errors. So if you look down the side here, it highlights some of the areas. So we can flip through them by pressing the F2 key. So there's an unused variable I. So I is initialized there, so it's never used there. So that can be deleted. And after each refactor, we can rerun the test. Tallies is immediately rewritten. So this tally here automatically rewrites that tallies there. So that line can go. Local value of I is overridden immediately. So here, the value of I is automatically is taken from the range, so it doesn't need to be declared as 0 to start with. Now there's a duplicate code fragment here, 6 lines long. So if we look at that, that code there, that block of 6 lines, basically is taking tallies, it's filling an empty array of 0 value from 0 to 6, and then it's taking the dice that are passed in here and incrementing that particular array. So it's basically doing a count of the dice at that particular index. That's the same code. That's the same code. That's the same code. Although it's highlighted slightly different, you can see that PHPStorm is saying it's actually the same type of code. Tallies. So this code block can be refactored. Right? Control Alt and M. Okay, so let's basically refactor that to its own method. Where you keep using weak comparisons here, double equal signs instead of triple equal signs. This is more static analyze problems. I'll come back to them later. These didn't have the code blocks around them. That's just an early return. I just want to have a look at the remaining ones. So this is type hint in and return type. So I'll come back to them later. Return type and type hint in, that's fine. That's all I'm doing is just the easy refactoring that the IDE is advising. Return types and type hinting I'll come back to. So here, it's got an if statement with no body, so it's just a case of wrapping it. That it complies with PSR 12. Equal signs. Yeah, and after each one, try and run the tests again. Type hinting and return types I'll come back to. Using Alt and J to select multiple lines and turn it into a triple equal sign. Type hinting, return types I'll come back to. All I'm doing is hitting Alt and Enter and selecting the required function.
You can see there's quite a bit of duplication there, so I'm just going to fast forward it towards the end and to the conclusion of this particular section.
Okay. So that's the base class cleaned up using just purely the advice from PHPStorm. Now that it's in a better starting place to start refactoring, and I can start thinking about the steps that I want to take. Next thing I want to do is have a look at the tests. So the tests, I want to do the same sort of thing, start at the top, see if there's any issues. So I can see automatically on the right hand side there's very few issues. And do the same thing, press F2 and go through each. So Yahtzee isn't a spelling error. Yahtzee is the correct spelling for the Scandinavian version. So there's no errors found in this particular file. So that's the first stage that I do when I approach these particular katas. Try and use the power of PHPStorm to advise on how I can tidy up the starting code. Always making sure that the tests are passing after every little refactor. This is sometimes referred to as one-handed refactoring, and literally you're pointing and clicking and following the advice that the PHPStorm or your IDE is giving you.
The next video.
Now that I've followed the instructions in my IDE, I now want to use some instructions from Easy Coding Standard. In Composer, there are some scripts that are already set up to make it easier to run, to use these helper functions. One of them is to check the code using Easy Coding Standard, and the other one is to fix the code using Easy Coding Standard. You can also see that there are some batch files here that just run composer check CS, so it will run that particular script, and composer fix CS, so it will run that particular script. That's all I have to do is go to the command line and type cc, and it'll automatically run composer check CS and do composer run Easy Coding Standard and advise all of the problems that it detects. So it's checking all of the files in the src directory, and it'll check the files in the test directory. First thing it wants to do is move the constructor. So the constructor, I don't know whether you noticed, but it's in the middle of the file. It wants to remove the return types when they're unnecessary. Correct false and true, where there's no need for them to be capitalized. She wants to use camel case rather than snake case. It does all of this automatically. That's all I need to do now is run fix code. It will do all of those refactoring for me automatically. I'll run check code again. Everything's shiny and new. So if I have a look at the ECS file, you can see that it's set up to look in the source directory and the test directory. And these are the sets that it's going to run. So strict code comparison, PSR12, clean code, so on and so forth. This is a good starting place. Again, to get your code consistent and easy to read.
Now that I have all of the code under a reasonable standard, so it's all PSR12 clean code, I can start having a look to see how this particular class is constructed. First thing I can see is there's different ways of calling and constructing the initial test compared with the second test. I can also see from the third test there for Yahtzee, it's calling by passing an array of numbers, whereas all the rest seem to be passing integers or individual items into the constructor. If I go down further, I can see that the majority of them are being called statically and then calling the method, whereas there are some that are being newed up and then the method is being called. So clearly there's some inconsistencies here. If I look further down, the vast majority of them are being called statically and the parameters are being passed in to the method. So it makes sense to try and standardize on this particular method of calling. So I want to now standardize on that particular method. So here I'm just going to get rid of these unnecessary variables. All the tests are still passing. And here, again, I'm going to get rid of these unused variables, unnecessary local variables. Tests are still passing. So this is the only one that's being constructed this particular way. So I'm going to refactor this particular class so that it's constructed exactly the same ways as the majority of the others. So the first thing it does is it converts the array into a count. So we've already got a method for that. Change constructor. Find the other one. That's properly. Self gets tabs. Okay, still got one failing test. So it's looping over the count and checking to see if any of them have got a number 5. So there's an easier way of finding out if there is a count of 5 in the array. I believe it's called in array. To see if the value is in an array. I want to see if 5 is in the array counts. It is, it can return 50. One failed. Too few arguments passed to Yahtzee. Let's go ahead and change the constructor. Yeah. So that constructor is better now. This. So that we return in the array, returning the value when it's successful, and doing the unsuccessful checks first. Okay, the next thing I want to do is have a look at these fours. This is looping through the fours for this dice. So the constructor is going to be changed so that it passes in, and it's a static call. Pair it with threes. We want it to be set up the same way as threes, except we're checking for fours. The appearance of a 3 when we change it to a 4. But now the constructor is going to be incorrect. It's going to be called statically. Some values. And all the tests are passing again. Log 4. And we'll do the same probably for 5. It's 5 is starting with capital F, which you shouldn't do. Same thing. Oops. set for that one. Just change to 4. And then called. Fives. Same for 6s. 5. Let's get out the old one and change how it's called. And that's being called now in a consistent manner. Lowercase. And we can clear the 6s. So let's have another look at these tests. See if they're all consistent, if there are any other issues that we can spot. So that's being called statically. That's being called statically. There's no edge cases on that one, but you wouldn't expect there to be an edge case. Ones, twos. So there's a slight discrepancy there, maybe. Naming convention. Yahtzee scores 50. Fours doesn't enter the test. Fives, test 6s. 1 pair, 2 pair. Possibly that should be camel case. Set for 2 pair. Yeah, 3 of a kind. Again, should be camel case. Test the passing. Small straight, large straight, full house. So again, there's small improvements. Every time there's an improvement made, it's a case of running the tests and making sure that everything's still passing.
Okay, so now I can start refactoring some of these methods. Start off with chance. As it says, chance is just the sum of all the dice. So if I just ignore what's there at the minute, that's all I have to do. Return a sum of all the dice. And all the tests are passing. This can go. Next one is Yahtzee. So Yahtzee, I've already had a go at refactoring this when I changed it to a static class. So I'm happy with that. Now I can check ones. So ones, really that's all I want to do is get the count of all the dice and return the count for the dice that's at index for 1, which is offset. So it's 1 minus 1. Tallies. And then I can return count for 0. And the same is going to be the same method for 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s. Remembering that it's off by 1. And you actually multiply it by 2. These are going to be the same, multiplied by 3. Four is going to be the same, multiplied by 4. Remembering the offset, of course. Five multiplied by 5. And 6 is multiplied by 6. Next, I want to test one pair. Turning 0 end. So that particular test is not being, that particular edge case is not being tested. We can double check that by running it with coverage. You can see we're down to 89% of coverage. This particular test isn't being checked. Edge case isn't being checked. So we need to write a test for that. That's gone up to 90% now. And the edge case is now being checked. I want to try and flip this so that it returns 0 and then it returns the actual result. So if you remember from a previous test, we looked to see if there was a 2. I think it was the Yahtzee one where we looked for 5 in counts. So let's go to the Yahtzee one. So we're at line 97. Yahtzee is right at the beginning. As you can see, this constructor is now not being used at all. Which is what I was expecting. So here we're checking to see if it's got a count of 5. And instead of a count of 5, we want to check to see if there's a count of 2. Run the tests, still passing. Run the coverage. You see this is now not being tested, but this one is. So that's a better way around. 2 pair is the next one. Again, this is a similar thing where it's trying to loop through and find 2 pairs. That's not going to be so easy to identify. So in this case, I'm going to leave it this particular way around. Next, I'm going to have a look at 3 of a kind. And the first thing that stands out to me is this particular edge case is not being tested. So we can put that right. Okay, so if we check the coverage figure has gone up again. Now this particular edge case is being tested. Again, this is searching for larger or equal to 3, so it's not going to be a particularly easy one to test the opposite of, especially as it's looping over all of the tallies, counts. Next one is a small straight. So small straight is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the dice. Again, there's not going to be a lot I can do there to check that. Large straight, again, this looks fine to me. So this is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, returns 20. Okay, so finally we got the full house, I believe. Yeah, finally is a full house. On here, I don't like the look of these variables. Local variables. What is an _2 and an _2 at? Don't particularly like the look on them, so I'll see if I can rename them. So looking at this, it's checking to see if there is a 2 or a 3, and then multiplying wherever it found those locations. So this is a pair. Yeah, so it's finding a pair, and it's finding 3. So let's see if we can rename that. I'll rename this one. Rerun the test and they're all passing. So I think that's a little bit clearer what it's actually doing. We could reverse this. Make it early return. Okay, so let's have a final look over this now. You can see there's 2 errors. This private property dice is never used. And that constructor, we've already got away with that one. And there's still one more error. So there's a missing return statement. So here we're doing an early return. We're looking for one pair or score pair, which is finding a 2 in the array, and then we're looking through the array to find where the 2 actually is. So this is actually incorrect. It will always return from this, either in this state, this block here or this block here will return. So there's no need to have a return outside of one of these blocks. So if we do the code coverage, we're 98% of lines, which is probably just that one statement which is incorrect. It's just that one statement there. All the rest of the lines are all green. Okay, so let's have a quick look through. We've got chance. Let's reformat the code, make it look a little bit better. We've got Yahtzee, checking for 1s, 2s, 3s. Gets tallies is in the middle, so let's move that to the end. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5s and 6s. Then you've got a score pair, 2 pair, three of a kind, small straight, large straight, and a full house. So I think this code is a lot better than when we originally found it. It's a lot more consistent, and that's where I'm going to leave this particular kata.
Okay, that's the end of the videos. Let me just pull up the end of my presentation. Screen one. Share that. So if you're interested in doing these particular katas, there are another 7 katas that you can do. They're available on the GitHub. I got a link there to my blog where it points out the 7 PHP katas. If you're interested in resources about clean code, principles of good design, if you're interested in test-driven development, then I've got a couple of plans there that I used a year or so back to try and improve myself. If you have any questions, then I'm available.
Cool, thanks, Michael. That was really interesting stuff. Yeah, I don't know if anybody else felt about that, but yeah, I think the code we had at the end was definitely a lot better and a lot cleaner than what we had at the beginning, for sure. And yeah, I'm a big fan of having lots of smaller methods that are really sort of descriptive, but easy to read. Yeah, I was working on some code recently, and it's like with sort of 4 or 5 or 6 nested bit if statements deep at that point, and magic strings everywhere. It's a little bit of a nightmare. So
Definitely.
yeah, as much as we can split that up, the better, for sure.
Yeah. I think this Carter is quite a good one because it is fairly straightforward code to look at, but there's loads of errors. And I was looking through it today, and I finished recording them yesterday. I thought I've missed something, but there I could have improved that. I missed something there, I could have improved that. And there's just so much you can go back to, and you can improve again and again. And I think I said in the beginning that we were going to go and have a look at return types and code hinting or code. And we didn't do that as this time. But I think I recorded for over an hour anyway, so it's probably plenty to start off with anyway. But there's still a lot more that can be done to that Carter, which when you think about it is quite interesting. And there's never a wrong way to do it. There's always something you can bring different. Previously, I've done that Carter, and I newed up everything, and I called everything with a method, and I found that was quite a good way because you could construct the dice or the count of the dice in the constructor, and then it was always available in every single method. So whereas when you're calling it statically, the majority of the methods were calling this count. Some of them were still calling it tallies, some of them were calling it count, some were calling it T. So there was still loads of room for improvements. So really nice Carter. You can do as much and as little as you want as well. So I've left it. Looking back at it, there's a lot more I could do. So
and it's no one to stop. No one that you can keep going forever.
I thought I've recorded for an hour. That's enough. Hopefully, you didn't find it too boring.
No, it's good. I've been reading. You can see this. Yeah, this book is the Martin Fowler Refactoring book. So we started reading it. We started doing Dev Book Club, and we got a few chapters in. But the US lot have been going way through it. But I've still been going through. It's really interesting stuff, actually. And I got some of those other sort of Gang of Four type books down here. The next one I've got to read is got the continuous theory, but also building object-oriented software guided by tests. I think that's the next one I want to read. So they're all really good stuff. So
that particular one, there is a Carter for it. So the book itself is there's the second edition you got there is the Martin Fowler one, the refactoring one.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the second edition. The first edition was Java. The second edition is JavaScript.
Yeah.
Now there's actually on Emily Blanche's GitHub repositories, there's one for refactoring in JavaScript, and there's actually a version of it that's been translated into PHP. So you can actually follow along the book. The first chapter of the book, which is a lot of the refactoring anyway, and all the step-by-step guides, the first chapter of that book is actually available for free as a PDF download. So you can actually go through that Carter and follow the book and do all the refactoring. So definitely.
Thanks, Martin, for putting that in the chat. Brilliant.
Thanks, Martin.
Yeah.
But
Cool.
there's actually 8 of Emily Blanche's Carters that have PHP configured for them. So I enjoyed them so much over the last couple of years that I've actually contributed to them, and I brought them up to the latest standards. So they're all you can use them in PHP 8, or they're all standardized as well. So they've all got easy coding standard. They've all got PHPStorm. They've all got the latest or one of the latest PHP units, and the ones where you've got tests to start with, you can just run Composer install and you start running tests. There are 1 or 2 ways you're supposed to write the tests from the start. So the Gilded Rose Carter, it starts off without any tests, and it's up to you how you write those tests.
Oh, really?
So,
okay, Gilded Rose is one of the tricky ones.
Gilded Rose is a really, really technical one. So that's not one that I would recommend for anyone starting off, albeit it was one of the first ones that I did. And yeah, it was a really complicated one. So, but yeah, there's some really good beginner ones. The one for theatrical players, that is a really good starter one because it explains it step by step. You know, why are you refactoring this code? What are the improvements you're trying to make? Where are you trying to get to? And then once you've done all these refactoring and you've got the code in a good state, you can then refactor it. So yeah, it's really, really good.
Interesting. So how, you mentioned at the beginning, also we know that you've changed jobs, well, I'll say quite recently, but time.
Yeah, about a year ago now.
Together. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Time's just together. So how much of doing this type of exercise at Katas and things do you think helped with that sort of switch into that new role, do you think, beforehand? Or how much do you think it helped throughout all the interviews and everything?
Certainly one of the questions that always comes up in interviews is about testing. So every interview I've been to, right, what's your knowledge of testing? What do you know about PHP unit and so on and so forth? So being able to demonstrate that I can do these katas, and know about refactoring, know how to run tests, it certainly does help. The current job, we don't do test-driven development, so it would be something I would like to go towards. And I do write tests for some of the functions in the controllers that I refactor, so that certainly helps. And I've also investigated Cypress for front-end testing. So a lot of the frameworks that I use, a lot of it is to do with front-end rather than back-end. So it's very useful then to have Cypress, which is a JavaScript framework. You know, I can test all the links in the header and make sure the headers are all right. I can check the links in the footer and the footer's all right. And then it's just a case of testing individual pages rather than test every single link on every single page. So things like that have been really, really beneficial. And knowing how to approach it has been really good. One of the projects I worked on for the last three months now, it was taking code that was written 5 years ago. So, you know, somebody new to PHP thinking, oh, I'm going to refactor code that was written in, you know, PHP 5.6 and, you know, his legacy code with no tests would be absolutely, you know, thinking, oh, how am I going to approach this? But it's certainly given me a confidence in knowing how to approach it. And I've got that particular framework up to the latest version of the framework. It's running PHP 7.4. I've got some tests covering some of the methods. It's not 100% coverage, but it's certainly getting towards it. So yeah, it's definitely helped. Definitely.
Yeah, I'm in the same situation. This new code base I started working on, I don't think there are any sort of actual PHP unit or any sort of actual code level tests in there. So yeah, I'm just sort of doing, you know, as I'm adding new stuff or before I'm refactoring anything, trying to go in and write some tests before, at least for the new stuff. And then at least then hopefully we'll go back and start refactoring some stuff now once we get this thing live. So
yeah, good. I think one of the things that I demonstrated with this particular one is by having a really good test coverage, it really gives confidence in being able to refactor and change code. And you're running the tests regularly, you're making little changes. And if you notice once or twice, I got a bit flummoxed, I got a bit stumped. So I just rolled back a little bit, or I commented out what I'd done, rerun the test, knew that it worked. I knew then that I'd introduced the bug. So it was a case then of, okay, you know, what have I introduced? So once or twice I got flummoxed. I was debating whether to actually fast forward it. I thought, oh, no, I'll leave it in just to show that, you know, even though I got flummoxed and I was stumped, I did actually get there. So it took me probably a minute longer than it needed to, but I got there.
Yeah, it's just every little change, and that gets covered in the refactoring book, but also in the place. But doing these very small little refactors, rerun the tests again, do a commit, and then you've got that little save, you've got that checkpoint. Because if you do break something, you can just roll back to the previous commit, which is going to be, you know, a few minutes old probably at that point, rather than a few hours old, and then you've got to go back and unpick everything. So yeah, that's quite interesting. Cool. I don't see any questions. Matt said, really, really good to watch, lots to take in. Matt was having his dinner earlier on, so hopefully he's finished by now. Yeah, I don't see any other questions, but I think, yeah, that was really awesome. So thanks very much.
Thank you for having me.
No problem.